Heavenly Stories.
In the land of Canaan, under a sky vast and unyielding, Jacob's family thrived amidst rolling hills and grazing flocks. Jacob, also called Israel, was a patriarch hardened by years of toil and loss, yet softened by love for his 12 sons. Among them, Joseph stood apart. At 17, he was the son of Jacob's beloved late wife, Rachel, and the old man's pride shone in his eyes whenever Joseph was near. To mark his favor, Jacob gifted Joseph a coat, a vibrant, multicolored garment that gleamed against the dusty plains. It was more than clothing, it was a symbol, and to his brothers, a stinging reminder of their father's preference. Joseph was different, not just in his father's eyes but in his own spirit. He carried a quiet confidence, a spark that set him apart from the rugged pragmatism of his brothers. He tended the flocks alongside them, but his mind wandered to greater things. His brothers, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, and the others, were men of the earth, their hands calloused from herding and their tempers quickened by rivalry. Joseph, though, was a dreamer, both in sleep and in waking. His visions came unbidden, vivid and strange, and he shared them with a boldness that bordered on recklessness. One morning, as the family gathered under the shade of an acacia tree, Joseph recounted his first dream. "We were binding sheaves in the field," he said, his voice bright with conviction, "and my sheaf stood upright, while yours bowed down to it." His brothers' faces darkened. Reuben, the eldest, shifted uncomfortably, while Levi's eyes narrowed. To them, the dream was an affront, a boy's fantasy of lording over his elders. Jacob, listening nearby, raised an eyebrow but said nothing, his affection for Joseph tempering his concern. Not long after, Joseph shared another dream. "The sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed down to me," he declared, his words hanging in the air like a challenge. This time, even Jacob bristled. "What's this?" he chided. "Will your mother, brothers, and I bow to you?" Yet, in his heart, Jacob pondered the dreams, sensing something divine in their strangeness. The brothers, however, had no such patience. The coat, the dreams, Joseph's very presence, it all fueled their resentment. They muttered among themselves, their whispers laced with envy and scorn. The tension simmered as the brothers tended their father's flocks in the fields of Shechem. Jacob, trusting Joseph's keen eye, sent him to check on them. Clad in his bright coat, Joseph trekked across the hills, unaware of the storm brewing in his brothers' hearts. When they saw him approaching, a speck of color against the horizon, their bitterness flared. "Here comes the dreamer," Simeon sneered, spitting into the dust. "Let's see what becomes of his dreams now." Levi, ever quick to anger, proposed killing him and throwing his body into a pit, blaming wild beasts. Reuben, though, urged restraint, his conscience pricked by the thought of bloodshed. "Let's not kill him," he said, hoping to save Joseph later. "Throw him into a pit, alive." As Joseph drew near, the brothers acted. They seized him, tore off his coat, and cast him into a dry cistern. His cries echoed from the depths, but their hearts were hardened. While they sat to eat, a caravan of Ishmaelite traders appeared, bound for Egypt. Judah, seeing profit over murder, suggested selling Joseph. For 20 pieces of silver, the deal was struck. Joseph, bound and bewildered, was hauled away, his dreams now a distant memory. The brothers dipped his coat in goat's blood and returned to Jacob, who wept bitterly, believing his son dead. In their silence, the seeds of guilt were sown, while Joseph's journey into slavery began. The caravan trudged through the desert, its camels swaying under the weight of spices, balm, and myrrh. Among the cargo, bound and bruised, was Joseph, no longer the favored son but a commodity sold for silver. The Ishmaelite traders, their voices coarse with barter, paid little mind to the young Hebrew's silence. His heart churned with fear and betrayal, the faces of his brothers haunting his thoughts. The vibrant coat was gone, replaced by coarse cloth, and the dreams that once filled him with purpose now seemed like cruel illusions. Yet, beneath his despair, a flicker of faith endured, a whisper that his story wasn't over. Egypt's borders loomed, marked by the Nile's shimmering ribbon and the sprawl of bustling markets. In the city of Memphis, Joseph was sold again, this time to Potiphar, a high-ranking officer in Pharaoh's court. Potiphar's household was a world apart from Canaan's open fields, grand with limestone walls, fragrant with lotus flowers, and alive with the hum of servants. Joseph, now a slave, was thrust into this new reality. His quick mind and steady demeanor soon caught Potiphar's eye. Tasked with menial chores at first, Joseph worked with a diligence that belied his circumstances. He organized supplies, oversaw laborers, and carried himself with an unshaken dignity. Potiphar, a man of power but keen judgment, noticed Joseph's knack for order. He promoted him, entrusting the management of his entire household to the young Hebrew. Under Joseph's care, the estate flourished, storehouses brimmed, and servants worked with newfound efficiency. Potiphar attributed the prosperity to Joseph's God, a divine blessing that seemed to follow the slave's every step. For a time, Joseph found stability, even purpose, in his work. The pain of betrayal dulled, though it never fully faded. At 20, he stood tall, his eyes sharp with intelligence, his heart guarded but hopeful. Trouble, however, was never far. Potiphar's wife, a woman of beauty and cunning, took notice of Joseph, not for his skill, but for his youth and striking presence. She approached him, her words laced with temptation, urging him to betray his master's trust. Joseph refused, his loyalty to Potiphar and his faith in God unwavering. "How could I do such a thing and sin against God?" he said, his voice firm but respectful. Her advances persisted, each refusal stoking her frustration. One day, seizing a moment alone, she grabbed his cloak, demanding his compliance. Joseph fled, leaving the garment in her hands. Fury turned to vengeance. Potiphar's wife accused Joseph of attempting to assault her, brandishing his cloak as evidence. Potiphar, torn between trust in Joseph and the weight of his wife's words, chose anger over doubt. He ordered Joseph thrown into the king's prison, a grim fortress where Egypt's outcasts languished. The cell was damp and shadowed, a far cry from the opulence of Potiphar's house. Yet, even in chains, Joseph's spirit held firm. The prison warden, much like Potiphar, saw something remarkable in him. He placed Joseph in charge of the other prisoners, and the jail ran smoothly under his care. In the darkness, Joseph met two new figures, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and baker, both imprisoned for offending the king. They came to him with troubled dreams, seeking meaning. Joseph, guided by the same divine insight that shaped his own visions, interpreted their fates. The cupbearer's dream foretold restoration, the baker's, execution. 3 days later, both predictions came true. Joseph asked the cupbearer to remember him, to plead his case before Pharaoh. But as the cupbearer walked free, his promise faded, leaving Joseph in the prison's grip, waiting for a deliverance that seemed impossibly distant. The prison was a world of stone and shadow, where daylight barely reached through narrow slits in the walls. Joseph, now in his mid-20s, had traded the open fields of Canaan and the grandeur of Potiphar's estate for the grim confines of Egypt's royal dungeon. Yet, even in this bleak place, his presence stood out. The warden, a grizzled man hardened by years of overseeing criminals, saw something in Joseph, a steadiness, a clarity that set him apart from the thieves and traitors around him. He put Joseph in charge of the prison's daily operations, trusting him to keep order among the inmates. Under Joseph's care, the chaos of the jail softened, meals were distributed fairly, disputes settled quietly, and the prisoners, sensing his integrity, respected him. Joseph's days were filled with routine, but his nights were haunted by memories of Canaan, his father's voice, his brother's betrayal, the pit's cold walls. He clung to his faith, believing God had not abandoned him, though the path ahead remained hidden. His gift for dreams, once a source of pride, now felt like a burden. Yet, it was this gift that had brought him purpose in the prison. The interpretations he gave to the chief cupbearer and baker had spread whispers of his ability, though the cupbearer's forgotten promise left Joseph with a lingering sting of disappointment. Still, he waited, trusting that his time would come. 2 years passed, each day blending into the next, until a ripple of change reached the prison. Pharaoh, the god-king of Egypt, was troubled by dreams that shook his royal court. In one, 7 healthy cows emerged from the Nile, only to be devoured by 7 gaunt, ravenous ones. In another, 7 plump ears of grain were consumed by 7 thin, scorched ones. His magicians and advisors, renowned for their wisdom, stood baffled, their rituals and incantations useless. The court buzzed with unease, for Pharaoh's dreams were seen as omens, and their mystery threatened Egypt's stability. The chief cupbearer, restored to his place at Pharaoh's side, finally remembered Joseph. Guilt pricked him as he recalled the young Hebrew who had foreseen his release. He spoke to Pharaoh, recounting Joseph's uncanny ability to unravel dreams. The king, desperate for answers, ordered Joseph brought from the prison. Guards pulled him from his cell, and for the first time in years, Joseph felt the sun's warmth on his face. He was shaved, given clean clothes, and dressed in simple but respectable linen, a far cry from the shackles he'd worn moments before. Standing before Pharaoh in the opulent palace, Joseph listened as the king described his troubling visions. The court watched, skeptical of this foreign prisoner. But Joseph, calm and unwavering, spoke with authority. "The dreams are one," he said. "God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance will come to Egypt, followed by 7 years of famine so severe that the plenty will be forgotten." He urged Pharaoh to appoint a wise overseer to store grain during the good years, preparing for the hardship to come. His words carried a conviction that silenced the room. Pharaoh, struck by Joseph's insight and the divine clarity behind it, saw more than a prisoner, he saw a man touched by destiny. "Can we find anyone like this, a man in whom the Spirit of God dwells?" he asked his advisors. None dared disagree. At 30 years old, Joseph stood on the cusp of a transformation, his years of suffering poised to give way to a purpose greater than he could have imagined. The prison had not broken him, it had shaped him for the moment that was about to unfold. The air in Pharaoh's palace was thick with incense and expectation as Joseph stood before the throne. Moments ago, he had been a prisoner, his name barely a whisper in Egypt's vast hierarchy. Now, at Pharaoh's command, he was transformed. The king, convinced of Joseph's divine insight, declared him ruler over Egypt, second only to himself. A signet ring was slipped onto Joseph's finger, fine linen replaced his prison rags, and a gold chain gleamed around his neck. "You shall be called Zaphenath-Paneah," Pharaoh proclaimed, a name meaning, revealer of secrets. At 30, Joseph held the reins of a nation, tasked with saving it from the famine his visions foretold. Joseph embraced his role with the same diligence that had marked his days as a slave and prisoner. Egypt's 7 years of abundance had begun, and he set to work with relentless focus. He traveled the land, overseeing the construction of vast granaries in every major city. Farmers brought a fifth of their harvests, and under Joseph's meticulous plans, storehouses overflowed with grain. Scribes recorded every bushel, and workers toiled under his watchful eye. Egypt prospered, its fields golden and its people unaware of the lean years lurking ahead. Joseph's authority was unquestioned, his decisions swift and sure, yet he carried the weight of knowing what was to come. In his personal life, Joseph found a semblance of peace. Pharaoh arranged his marriage to Asenath, the daughter of a priest from On, a city of sun worshippers. Asenath was graceful and sharp-witted, and though their union was born of politics, a quiet bond grew between them. She bore Joseph 2 sons, Manasseh, named for the forgetting of his past hardships, and Ephraim, for the fruitfulness he found in Egypt. Holding his children, Joseph felt a warmth he hadn't known since Canaan, yet the memories of his brothers and father lingered like shadows. He wondered if they still lived, if they remembered the boy they'd sold. When the 7 years of plenty ended, the famine struck with merciless force. The Nile, Egypt's lifeline, offered little, and fields withered under a relentless sun. Hunger spread beyond Egypt's borders, gripping the lands of Canaan, Syria, and beyond. But Joseph's foresight had prepared Egypt. The granaries, brimming with grain, became a beacon for starving nations. Kings and traders sent envoys to buy food, and Joseph managed the sales with precision, ensuring Egypt's wealth grew even as the world suffered. His name was spoken with awe, a Hebrew who had become Egypt's savior. Far away in Canaan, Jacob and his sons felt the famine's claws. Their flocks thinned, and their stores dwindled. Jacob, now an old man with eyes dimmed by grief for Joseph, heard rumors of Egypt's grain. He gathered his sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, and the others, and sent them to buy food, but kept Benjamin, his youngest, close. The loss of Joseph had broken Jacob's heart, and he feared losing Rachel's only remaining son. The brothers set out, unaware that their journey would lead them to the brother they believed dead. In Egypt, Joseph stood in his court, robed in authority, as foreigners bowed before him. The famine had reshaped the world, and his role as vizier placed him at its center. Yet, as he looked out over the crowd seeking grain, his thoughts drifted to Canaan. Would his brothers come? Would they recognize the boy they'd betrayed in the man who now held their fate? The stage was set for a confrontation that would test not only their hearts but his own capacity for forgiveness. Years had passed since Joseph's imprisonment, and Egypt had become his new world. The young Hebrew, once a slave and prisoner, now stood as Zaphanath-Paneah, the vizier of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. His rise began with a dream, not his own this time, but Pharaoh's. 2 visions haunted the ruler: 7 fat cows devoured by 7 gaunt ones, and 7 plump ears of grain consumed by 7 withered ones. None of Pharaoh's wise men could unravel the mystery, but the chief cupbearer, restored to his position, remembered Joseph. He spoke of the Hebrew who interpreted dreams in prison, and soon Joseph was summoned. Clean-shaven and dressed in Egyptian finery, Joseph stood before Pharaoh. He listened intently as the king recounted his dreams. Without hesitation, Joseph declared their meaning: 7 years of abundance would come, followed by 7 years of famine so severe it would erase the memory of plenty. God had revealed the future, Joseph said, and Egypt must prepare. Pharaoh, struck by Joseph's wisdom and the divine clarity of his words, appointed him governor, tasking him with saving Egypt from ruin. A signet ring was placed on Joseph's finger, fine linen draped his shoulders, and a gold chain adorned his neck. At 30 years old, Joseph held power over the mightiest nation in the world. Joseph wasted no time. During the 7 years of abundance, he oversaw the collection of grain, storing it in vast granaries across Egypt. Cities swelled with surplus, and Joseph's meticulous planning ensured not a single harvest was wasted. He married Asenath, daughter of a priest, and she bore him 2 sons, Manasseh, meaning, God has made me forget my hardship, and Ephraim, God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. Joseph's past, his brother's betrayal, the pit, the slave traders, faded into the demands of his new life. Yet, in quiet moments, the memories lingered, a dull ache beneath his success. When the famine struck, it was as Joseph had foretold. Egypt's fields withered, and the Nile's bounty dried up. But thanks to Joseph's foresight, Egypt had grain to spare. Nations far and wide sent emissaries to buy food, and Joseph's granaries became the lifeline of the region. In Canaan, Jacob and his sons felt the famine's bite. Food was scarce, and survival grew uncertain. Hearing of Egypt's stores, Jacob sent 10 of his sons to buy grain, keeping Benjamin, his youngest and Joseph's only full brother, safe at home. The old man's heart still bore the scars of losing Joseph, and he clung fiercely to Benjamin. When the brothers arrived in Egypt, they bowed before the vizier, not recognizing the man they had sold into slavery. Joseph, however, knew them instantly. His heart raced as he saw their faces: Reuben, Judah, Levi, and the others, weathered by time and hardship. Speaking through an interpreter to conceal his identity, Joseph questioned them harshly, accusing them of being spies. They protested, explaining they were brothers from Canaan, sons of one man, with one brother dead and another left behind. Joseph's emotions churned, anger, longing, and a flicker of hope. He demanded they bring Benjamin to prove their story, holding Simeon as a hostage until they returned. The brothers left, shaken by the vizier's severity but unaware of his true identity. Joseph turned away as they spoke among themselves, confessing their guilt over what they had done to their lost brother years ago. They believed the hardship they now faced was punishment for their sin. Tears welled in Joseph's eyes, but he steeled himself. He wasn't ready to reveal the truth, not yet. The famine tightened its grip, and Joseph knew his brothers would return. The stage was set for a reckoning, one that would test their hearts and his own. The famine worsened, and Canaan's fields offered no relief. Jacob's household teetered on the edge of starvation, and the grain from Egypt was long gone. With no choice, Jacob relented, allowing Benjamin to join his brothers on their return to Egypt. Judah vowed to protect the youngest, swearing to bear the blame if anything happened to him. Jacob, heavy with grief and fear, prayed for their safety, haunted by the loss of Joseph and now risking his beloved Benjamin. In Egypt, Joseph awaited their arrival, his heart a tangle of anticipation and resolve. When the brothers appeared, bowing once more before the vizier, Joseph's eyes locked on Benjamin. The boy he remembered was now a man, yet the sight of him stirred memories of their shared mother, Rachel, and their childhood. Controlling his emotions, Joseph ordered a feast at his house, seating the brothers by age, a detail that unsettled them, unaware of how the vizier knew such things. He released Simeon and treated them with kindness, but his plan was not yet complete. To test their character, Joseph had his silver cup hidden in Benjamin's sack, along with their grain. As the brothers prepared to leave, Joseph's steward stopped them, accusing them of theft. The cup was found in Benjamin's possession, and the brothers were dragged back to face the vizier's wrath. Judah, stepping forward, pleaded for mercy, recounting their father's fragility and how Benjamin's loss would kill him. He offered himself in Benjamin's place, revealing a selflessness that struck Joseph deeply. The brothers who had once betrayed him now stood united, willing to sacrifice for one another. Unable to hold back any longer, Joseph dismissed his attendants and broke down. In Hebrew, he cried out, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" The brothers froze, terror and disbelief washing over them. Joseph wept so loudly that the sound echoed through the house. He stepped closer, his voice trembling. "I am your brother, Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. But don't be grieved or angry with yourselves, for God sent me here to preserve life." He explained how the famine was part of a divine plan, and his rise to power had saved countless lives, including theirs. The brothers, still reeling, fell into his embrace. Tears flowed as years of guilt and pain dissolved in forgiveness. Joseph sent them back to Canaan with wagons laden with provisions, urging them to bring Jacob and their families to Egypt. When they returned home and told Jacob that Joseph was alive, the old man's heart nearly failed him. But seeing the wagons and hearing their story, his spirit revived. "My son Joseph is alive. I will go to him before I die." In Egypt, Joseph and Jacob reunited in a moment of raw emotion. Jacob, frail and weathered, clung to his son, saying, "Now I can die in peace, having seen your face." Pharaoh welcomed Jacob's family, granting them land in Goshen to settle and thrive. Joseph provided for them, ensuring their survival through the famine's remaining years. The brothers, once divided by jealousy, were now bound by grace. Joseph's journey, from the pit to the palace, had not only saved a nation but restored a family. His forgiveness transformed betrayal into redemption, a testament to the power of mercy and the mysterious ways of providence.